Alrighty then. Time for a long overdue episode of The Metallist. And tonight, The Metallist presents the albums of UFO ranked. This is kind of like trying to rank my favorite children, as this does happen to be my favorite band. We've got 22 studio albums here, so quite a catalog, but of course it is a 50-year history here. So let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. All right, coming in, there's a 23. Maybe I miscounted. I don't know. All right, so coming in at the bottom from 2017 is the Salentino Cuts. This particular album is a covers album. So as far as I'm concerned, UFO's originals were plenty good. They did do an occasional cover here and there, but they didn't need to do an entire record. Some of the songs featured on here, there's Rock Candy, Montrose Classic, Mississippi Queen, and I don't know, it just doesn't sound right. Probably the best track on here is actually a song I don't know, and maybe that's the problem, is most of these songs are songs that are pretty well known, at least in my circles, and was a tune called River of Deceit by a band called Mad Season, which I'm vaguely familiar with, but not really. So that was pretty good, but everything else, not so much. But so I thought there was 22. Maybe there's 23 albums. Okay, doesn't matter. Okay, moving on. So we're going back pretty close to the beginning here. Coming at 22, we've got UFO 2, also called Flying 1 Hour Space Rock. And I'm not much for the space rock version of UFO, the Mick Bolton era. That's not Michael Bolton. We do not celebrate his entire catalog here. Those of you that get that will enjoy that little reference there. So what I remember on this record, there was Prince Chiduk. Yeah, I can't even say it. Kajuku, and the coming of Prince Chiduk. Forget it. And then there was this whole side that was just called Flying. And again, I'm not much on the space rock stuff. Some people, this is the UFO they swear by, but not me. So let's move on, since I can't pronounce the songs anyway. All right, 21. So from 1970, this is the very first album. I do like this one a little better. Once again, mentioning the covers. There is some covers on this one. Come On Everybody, which is an old Eddie Cochran classic. And Come Away Melinda, I think that's maybe Don McLean. I forget who that one is. And Boogie for George is an original one there that's pretty good. So that's why I give this album a slightly better nod than UFO 2. All right, so back a few years, back a decade or so, back to 2012, we've got an album here called Seven Deadly, coming in at number 20. Seven Deadly starts off pretty strong, but kind of tails off towards the end for me. First track is called Fright Night. That one's pretty good. One they continually play in concert and on the recent tours is called Burn Your House Down, so I assume that Phil must like that song pretty well. And it's a pretty decent song, kind of a brooding rocker, if you will. And yeah, so that pretty much does that album as far as I'm concerned. But again, probably my least favorite of the Vinnie Moore era. Coming in at 19, from 2006, The Monkey Puzzle. This is the last album with the late, great Pete Way. And a lot of people thought this was a little more UFO sounding. I don't know. Didn't really strike me as that. But again, some pretty good songs on here. Hard Being Me, that's a classic Pete Way kind of rocker. What else is on that album? Let me think. Kingston Town is kind of a good song. That's actually the last track on there. So that one's pretty good as well. But like I said, not as memorable as some of the other things that are coming up. Okay, so at 18, we've got The Visitor. All right, so The Visitor, matter of fact, this is the t-shirt I have on. This is from the Visitor tour. Visitor has some good songs on there. Saving Me is a good song, kind of starts off with a little acoustic guitar, a little slide guitar from Vinnie Moore. So that's a good start. Hell Driver is a good, solid rockin' song, as you imagine a song called Hell Driver might be. But the crown jewel of this album is pretty far into the record. It's a song called Villains and Thieves. And I was really hoping at some point they would play that song live, but that was not meant to be. But anyway, that's some pretty killer stuff. All right. So then we move on to 2015. Conspiracy of Stars, which I thought was going to be the last UFO album before the covers album popped up, and I could have done without the covers album. I'm okay. But Conspiracy of Stars was a pretty solid record. Run Boy Run is a killer song, and they did that one live quite a bit, so that's a really good song, good Phil rocker. And then, of course, Devil's in the Detail is another cool song. Rollin' towards the end of the record is another one that's a pretty good rocker. So again, a pretty solid record, and pretty high up on my list of the Vinnie Moore stuff. Speaking of Vinnie Moore stuff, we have You Are Here from 2004. Now, this is the lone album with Jason Bonham on the drums, and I was fortunate enough on this tour to meet Jason. That was kind of fun, and he signed the album for me. I believe I got Vinnie to sign the album that night for me as well. I have met Phil and the other boys on several different occasions, but not that particular night. But good record, really good record here. When Daylight Comes to Town starts the album off in fine fashion, good rocker. Then a serious rocker called Black Cold Coffee. It's got a little more of an up-tempo thing. You can really kind of feel the punch of Jason playing the drums. Then we got some little more subdued things. Wild One is just kind of a nice rocker, just kind of bubbles along comfortably, if you will. And then Mr. Freeze is definitely sort of that sort of darker side of Phil Long. And definitely a good song. Kind of reminds you of the whole sort of Reservoir Dogs vibe, that kind of thing. So, yeah, great record. All right, at number 15 from 2002, the last studio album with Michael Schenker called Sharks. My biggest issue with Sharks and the next album that I'll talk about here is the lack of Paul Raymond. And a good buddy of mine one time said that Paul Raymond was the Ringo of UFO, and I had to vehemently disagree with him on that, because I think Paul adds a lot to the sound, and you can really tell the difference between this and the albums he appears on. But at that point, him and Michael were not seeing eye to eye. So Paul Raymond does not appear on this record, but still a very good, solid record here. So what do we got on this one? Let me think for a sec. Outlaw Man, that's a cool song. Quicksilver Rider, another good rocker. Shadow Dancer is kind of my favorite. Reminds me actually of another song on Walk on Water called Darker Days, but we'll get to that here a little later. And Fighting Man, which is a concert fave that they've done quite a few times in recent tours. So again, good solid record. And then the previous album from 2000, another album with Michael Schenker on it. This one is called Covenant, and if you get the deluxe version of this, there's a live CD in there as well, so definitely look for that if you're out there trying to track down this album. Okay, so on Covenant, we got a great tune called Miss the Lights, and a neat little riff from Michael on that one. That's one of his more distinctive riffs, I would say, in recent years. Midnight Train is a pretty cool song. What else? In the Middle of Madness, yeah, that's a good one. And another cool one is called The Smell of Money, another one of those brooding Phil Mogg kind of rockers, which we've come to know and love. All right, so next up, going back to 1983, you got Making Contact. Now, this was the first album without Pete Way, and actually, I don't think there is a bass player listed on the album. And for the tour, the fill-in bass player was none other than Billy Sheehan. Fortunately, I did not get to see one of those gigs, because that would have been pretty awesome. I've seen some footage on YouTube with Billy playing with them, and it's very interesting, but unfortunately the footage is not that good a quality. But quite frankly, the first two songs, Blinded by a Line, Diesel in the Dust, and then just one kind of goes into the other, are just killer. I mean, those two songs alone are worth the price of admission on this album. So just killer stuff there. So it's a great start to it. When It's Time to Rock is a cool song. And then one I think that appears on the deluxe editions, but the flip side to When It's Time to Rock was a tune that originally was on the album called Everybody Knows. I have no clue why you would leave this song off this album. It's just freaking amazing. Just a great Paul Chapman rocker. And all the Paul Chapman stuff I always found to be a little more straightforward than like the Michael stuff. Michael was a little more eclectic and eccentric, which, we love him for that. But Paul's stuff was a little more just straight ahead, rock and roll. I guess I should call him Tonka to differentiating from Mr. Raymond. But yeah, so some good stuff there. All right, so next up, one about 5 years later. This one is actually an EP, and it's only about 6 songs, but I'll tell you what, some solid stuff here. At this point, we were down to, the key players were, of course, Phil Maud, and Paul Raymond was still there, but we had some other guys in here. There was a guy playing guitar who's a real shredder named Tommy McClendon, who went by the bizarre little moniker of Atomic Tommy M, which I always thought was ridiculous, but which is probably why I call him Tommy McClendon. But again, like I said, there was only like 6 songs on this, but some really good stuff there. Between a Rock and a Hard Place is a great song. At War with the World's another great one. Hunger in the Night, Easy Money, all pretty rockin' stuff. A lot of people were kind of really down on UFO during this era, but that's some pretty solid stuff. I like that record quite a bit, so as you can see, it ranks pretty high on the list here. Okay, a few years prior to that, this is a full-length studio album called Misdemeanor. A lot of people don't like this album. Well, actually, I like it a lot. I think one of the biggest issues most people have with this record is it's 1985. And of course, that mid-80s overproduced, too much vocals, lots of keyboards. Well, UFO kind of went along the same line. I've actually heard Paul Raymond in an interview saying that basically he dined out on this album. What he meant by that was he had a whole bunch of different keyboards that he was using. And of course, that was kind of the big thing, was the high-tech keyboards of the mid-80s. But it's definitely there. On this one, if you can find the UK version of this album, I would recommend that, because the American version, which has a slightly different cover, they even have extra vocals and extra keyboards up higher in the mix. And yeah, it's really polished. But again, some great songs. And then say Tommy McClendon, once again, at this point, from what I understand, Phil was actually trying to court Yngwie J. Malmsteen as his guitarist, but Yngwie was just starting his own solo career at that point, so he declined. But allegedly that he was after Yngwie Malmsteen, so he was looking for a shredder, and then he found Tommy McClendon. I don't know where exactly, but there you have it. So anyway, some good songs on this one. This Time's an awesome song. The Night Run it was in a movie of some kind, but I don't remember what the movie was. So Night Run was there. Mean Streets, Heaven's Gate. These are all really good songs and some really excellent guitar work, but I said a little shreddy. I mean, most people don't want that out of their UFO, and I can understand that. But it was an interesting, slightly different flavor for them at that point. But yeah, I did like Misdemeanor quite a bit. So after Misdemeanor and Ain't Misbehavin', there was a few years off. I thought maybe the band had finally dissolved. And then suddenly in 1992, this record pops up called High Stakes and Dangerous Men. Didn't have any knowledge of it. I happened to be working in a CD shop at the time, and all of a sudden this record floated, and I was like, oh my God, new UFO. So at this point, Pete had returned. So it was the mainstays at this point were, of course, Phil, who's on all the records, and Pete. And then we had a guitarist named Lawrence Archer. This is his only appearance with the band. Lawrence was actually famous for being in a band called Grand Slam before that, which was a post-Thin Lizzy band that Phil Lynott had put together. And that didn't actually go too far. There is some recordings available, but they never, I don't think they ever officially released a Grand Slam record because they were having difficulties getting a record deal. I think partially because Phil Lynott was still having his issues with the various drugs that he was into, which of course, claimed his life soon after that. But an interesting record here, pretty darn good. As you can see, it's pretty high on my list. Almost a little bit of a Western flavor on some of the tunes, like Borderline, but then Prime for Time is a great song. Ain't Life Sweet is a freaking rocker, really good stuff. Backdoor Man, another one of those kind of brooding Phil type tunes, really good. Love Deadly Love, so a lot of good stuff on here. And I may have this a little higher than maybe you would think I should, simply because I think that at that point, I just hadn't had a UFO for a long time, so I was pretty excited to have something like that. So let's go ahead and continue on. So next up, all the way back to 1974, this is the first album with Michael called Phenomenon. And I know there's going to be some people out there raising some eyebrows going on, wait a minute. That's pretty far down the list. It's like, yeah, I know. And you're going, but it's got Dr. Doctor and Rock Bottom on it. I realized this as well. It's also got some other cool tunes. It's got Too Young to Know, All Mine, and Queen of the Deep, which is almost Sabbathy in its heaviness. I mean, it's a very cool song. But still, a lot of the space rock elements were still kind of there that existed from the Mick Bolton era. So while I think it's a great record, I think Dr. Doctor and Rock Bottom are obviously much better served on Strangers in the Night. So that's why I've kind of given it a little bit lower rating than you might expect. All right, next up, number 8 from 1980, the first album with Tonka, Paul Chapman, called No Place to Run. Really, really liked this album when it came out. And of course, this was a time when Michael had left the band. Paul came in and actually finished the tour from previous and then did this studio album with them. And a lot of people were a little suspect, right? But some good stuff here. We start off with Alpha Centauri, which is a little bit of an instrumental, and goes into Letting Go, which is just a rousing rocker. Love that one. Then a couple tunes that are kind of obscured, some deep cuts, but absolutely love them. This Fire Burns Tonight. Pete does some just really cool, not necessarily fancy, but just some really cool bass work on that one. And then same thing with the next track, which is called Gone in the Night. Now the title track, killer. Just a towering classic in my opinion. No Place to Run, just an amazing song. Then there's a nice ballad on there, just a little acoustic number called Take It or Leave It, which is really excellent. And then we end with another one of those kind of brooding Phil Mogg tunes called Any Day. But Tonka's solo on the outro on that one, if you haven't heard it, go check it out, please. All right, coming in number 7, another Paul Chapman record, Mechanics, 1982. Really enjoy this one a lot. Let's see, what's this one? This one starts off with The Writer, and then we got We Belong to the Night, which is just a killer song. Another great rocker. And like I said, again, I think the Paul Chapman stuff was a little more straightforward in the rocking arena there. Then we've got Let It Rain, definitely a classic. And another sort of brooding rocker of Phil's. I know I've used that term a few times. Feel It, and then just a killer rocker to finish the album out called Dreaming. So again, just a great record. Really like the early 80s Chapman stuff. Speaking of which, the album right before that, The Wild, the Willing, and the Innocent. This is my favorite, I think, of the Chapman era. In a lot of respects, the more I think about it, it's like I probably could have ranked this album even higher. Because, I mean, to me, side 1 is perfection. It's just fantastic. Change Chains, Long Gone, the amazing title track, and It's Killing Me. Just awesome stuff. And then on the flip side, we've got, notice I'm talking albums here, but it is 1981. The flip side, we've got Making Moves, which is another great song, and then one of my all-time favorites called Profession of Violence. And kind of a little bit more of a mellow thing here. But Phil was very famous, I think, for kind of putting out songs where the tone of the song didn't necessarily match the lyrics. Because this is kind of a very pleasant song, a little bit orchestrated. As a matter of fact, in 95, they redid this song with Vinnie Moore and then also with a string section. And really good. I mean, I was really pleased that they picked that particular song to do. But the song is actually about the English mafia. So and then of course the title, Profession of Violence, you'd think this would be more of a, sort of a metal track, if you will, but it's really not. But again, some beautiful guitar work from Paul Chapman. I think Paul always was underrated just because he, was always going to be in the shadow of Schenker. So, all right. So into the top 5 here. Number 5, we've got No Heavy Petting, 1976. So this album was a bit of a hiccup, I think, at the time compared to its predecessor, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But still, some great songs on here. Natural Thing is on here. Can You Roller, Reasons Love, Highway Lady, On With the Action. Oh, amazing. Love that song. And what's really cool is if you have seen my video on the box set for Strangers in the Night, for some reason on the original album, they did not put a version of On With the Action, but a lot of the shows from that set have On With the Action live on them, which is just fantastic. So yeah, big favorite there. And then a bonus track that you can find on some versions of this album, All or Nothing, which is an old Small Faces tune. And that's pretty darn good too. All right, so we're getting into the upper echelon here. Number 4 from 1995, the huge reunion, Walk on Water. Oh, I was so ready for this record when it came out, which may be parts of the reason why I keep thinking like, maybe I ranked this a little higher than maybe I should have. I don't know. I think it's awesome. I mean, just a really good record. Matter of fact, the CD shop I was working at the time, this album came out in Japan only in 1995. It didn't really come out in the States until like 1998. So quite a bit of time passed. But we always kept copies of this in the store. And the Japanese imports were expensive. I mean, we're talking, in the mid 90s, a Jap import was, I think we sold them for $34.99 or $35.99, something like that. And the guy that owned the store, when he ran his reports for the end of 1995, he's like, Walk on Water was in our top 50 sellers of the year at $35 a pop. That's pretty impressive, but I used to play it a lot in the store too. But anyway, so the tracks are on this one, A Self-Made Man. If you have not heard this song, go to YouTube, pause this, go to YouTube, I'll wait. It is amazing. It's one of Michael's coolest, most vicious riffs. I mean, just, so good. Concert favorite that was also on the album is called Venus. I still play that one quite a bit, another really good song. Push to the Limit is a slamming rocker, almost Scorpions in its vibe. Darker Days, which I mentioned the tune off of Sharks called Shadow Dancer. Darker Days is like part 1, and Shadow Dancer is like Darker Days part 2. So kind of similar vibes on those songs. Knock Knock is another Pete Way classic, just some classic rock and roll from the man himself. And then Dreaming of Summer, which is also almost like part 2 of Love to Love. Just has that kind of vibe to it. But I mean, just a great album. And if you get this version here, because there's some different covers on this album, but if you get the version that you see on the screen here, they also did, excuse me, they also did a remake of Dr. Doctor and Lights Out. And quite frankly, they should have just went back and done all the old albums at this point, because the sound quality is excellent. It sounds really great. So look up those versions of those two tunes if you haven't heard them already. So yeah, Walk on Water, huge favorite. And at that point, it was nice to see the tour, because they did tour the States in 95, even though the album was only released in Japan. And yeah, that was the first time I got to see that lineup on stage in 17 years, so I was pretty psyched, to say the least. All right. Number 3, got Force It. Now, the majority of Strangers in the Night came off of this album, and I think most of us agree that probably the Strangers version are superior, but like I say, once again, a lot of great songs on here. We got Let It Roll, we got Shoot Shoot, which has been the closer for a UFO gig for I don't even know how long. Out on the Street, another classic. Mother Mary, this Kids, I mean, just good stuff. So that's it. At number 3, we got Force It. And probably no big surprises here. At number 2, of course, Lights Out from 1977. And I mean, just a classic. I mean, Too Hot to Handle was probably the first tune I ever heard by them. And they used to play that stuff on the radio, believe it or not. So yeah, Too Hot to Handle is amazing. Just Another Suicide is a deep cut that is just a classic. If you haven't heard that one, check that one out as well. And then we got a nice ballad called Try Me. Of course, the title track is amazing. Getting Ready is awesome. Electric Phase is a very cool song. You have to listen to Electric Phase kind of close, because Michael does some really weird guitar parts in there, but they're kind of covered underneath like the heaviness of the main riff. But listen closely. He does some really interesting things in there. And of course, the all-time classic, probably my favorite song ever by UFO, of course, is Love to Love. So that closes out the album. But I do have one album that I thought was just a little bit better. And that came out the following year, 1978's Obsession. So yeah, this record here is pretty much perfect start to finish. We start with Only You Can Rock Me, then we got Pack It Up and Go. A great Schenker instrumental called Arbery Hill, which takes us into Ain't No Baby, which is another great song. Looking Out for Number 1. Got some orchestration going on there. It's really good stuff. We go to the flip side. We got Hot and Ready. Funny story about that. They did play Hot and Ready during that Strangers in the Night era, and that's also on the box set. But apparently, Paul Raymond, I heard allegedly used to sing Hot and Ready Pizza to Go, which would really irritate Phil to the point that they quit doing the song. So, but Hot and Ready's on there. Of course, the Pete Way classic Cherry is there. You Don't Fool Me. And then we have a little reprise, of Looking Out for Number One. And then one more for the rodeo. Amazing song. If you have not heard that one, that's another one you need to check out. But just a classic rocker from UFO, one of my favorite songs. I don't know if I could pick a top 10 for UFO, but it would probably be in there. And then we have a nice ballad to end with some great work from Schenker on the guitar called Born to Lose. So there you have it. That is my ratings for the UFO albums. Again, I want to thank you guys for listening. And please comment, like, and subscribe. And we will see you next time.